today, and thank you to Chamber for inviting me to be involved in the programme of events, and well done, Lauren, for pivoting so quickly and moving to virtual events. It's not easy, so well done to the team. I know this is a really challenging time for our whole community, so I just want to start by saying I hope that this finds you, your families, your colleagues all safe and well. I'm conscious that data protection may not be uppermost on any of our minds at the moment. It's been an extraordinary year, 12, 18 months, hasn't it? And I want to encourage us now to take a moment in amongst all the craziness, just to look at what we need to be doing with our data and around data, and also try to maybe engage and understand a bit more about the role it will play and continues to play in the future, positioning us for economic recovery and economic health as we look towards a post-pandemic world, and let's hope that's sooner rather than later. So I want to talk today about why getting the protection of data right matters for us as individuals, for our community, and also for our bailiwick and our economy. I want to give you a brief summary of what the law requires and give you some steps, practical steps that you need to think about taking. And that will include the updated registration duties that you've probably already heard about. Some of you may already have done it, so I'll reference that, talk a little bit about that. And I want to mention this is not a detailed setting out of what the law requires. It's a beefy piece of legislation for anyone that's seen the actual text. This is aimed at signposting you to more information, which you can look at in your own time. Every business will have its own specific processing activities, and there's no one size fits all in terms of compliance, and we can't do it for you largely because of that. What you do need to do is take the tools and take the information and translate them across to your own activity. So hopefully this will help you to do that. And we'll hopefully have some time at the end to have some discussion and questions. I know it's not necessarily as easy on this platform, but please do ask me anything that you want to know or need to know. And equally, feel free to get in touch afterwards. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email's on the website as well. So I appreciate it may not be easy to ask some of these questions in this format, but please do feel free. If I can't answer them, then I will just say so, and I'll come back to you with the answer a little later on. The starting point, which is really, really important for me to emphasize, is that we're not on opposing sides. I really object to regulators that set themselves up, sort of position themselves as somehow adversaries to their regulated community. And of course, sometimes we have to do things that may not be popular with people, but we do those things in accordance with our statutory duties, not on a whim. And we do them with really robust governance around our decision making, and importantly, in the name of those who have been affected. And they rarely have a voice. So that's an important point I wanted to make before I start. First and foremost, we want you to get this right, and we want to do all we can within the constraints of still a pretty small office to give you the information and tools to make good and informed decision around data. There are a number of reasons why this matters. Something that often gets lost, and I think it's a great shame that it gets lost, and I think it's incumbent upon me to make sure it doesn't get lost in the future, is the fact that this is about you. It's about me. It's about your family, your friends, your colleagues. At its heart, data protection law is about people and ensuring that we are all treated properly and treated fairly. And it's hard to overstate the impact that data is now having on all aspects of our lives, what news feeds we see, what jobs we might be offered, whether we get those jobs, whether we get a loan or credit or mortgage, what we pay for a product. The list is really endless. So we do need to care, first and foremost, about what happens to data. And in doing so, that means we care about the people sitting behind those bits of data, those data sets. And the starting point really is, how would you like your own information to be treated by other organisations? How would you like the information of your child, your parent, your friends to be treated? So that's a really good starting point. There is, of course, also a very, very important economic context to this. There is just so much, I'm such a firm believer in this, that there is huge potential for jurisdictions who take this seriously and who do it well. Data has become the lifeblood of economies of our world. And if we do it well in the Bailiwick, which I think we are doing, there are, I believe, huge opportunities as we enter the digital era and the revolution around the use of data. Just to illustrate that role of data, I just came across this story last week, which I thought was so interesting, that we saw the recent purchase of Debenhams, you'll see here on the slide. And it really shows the profound changes we are seeing in our economies and in our world, that this multi-million-pound deal was more interested in customer data. It's a little arrow on the slide there. It talks about they wanted to concentrate on customer data. They didn't want the bricks and mortar, they didn't want the shops, they wanted the data and the brand. And this tells us so much about where we are and how fast things are changing and evolving. And I want this knowledge, that we have this knowledge, but we use that to start to shift our perspective in this area. So rather than seeing the regulations and the rules that sit around it as restricting us, we start to look at it as it's opening up opportunities and allowing us to build the trust and the confidence that's so vital in any social or economic business transaction or interaction. So it's giving us something rather than taking something away from us. So I would encourage you not to look at this whole area as needing to comply simply because the regulator tells you to. You need it to comply because your business and your clients need you to. So let's move to looking briefly at some key areas of the legislation itself. Now, underpinning this, hopefully you can see it. As I say, this is not designed to be a detailed analysis of each of these areas, but to signpost you, and this language may be familiar to some, it may not be to others. So these are all things that you can find out more on our website. So underpinning it, really I see it as a sort of the bedrock, the foundations of the legislation are the principles. And they involve responsibilities for organisations, and they involve rights for individuals. And you can see at the bottom the word accountability. We'll come back to that in a minute. But all these pillars represent things that the law requires you to do around data. And taking each one of them, you really don't want to have a data that's not accurate. You really don't want to have data that is not being collected in a fair and lawful way. So all this does really make good business sense as well. And it's unfortunate when things are put in legal jargon that sometimes we get estranged from what it's actually trying to do at its heart. But all of these things represent good data governance and good business governance in my view. Okay, I want to forgive the wordy slide, and I'm not really one for wordy slides, but it's really important that we translate some of this into practical steps. So as I say, each one of these, it could do with a couple of hours of discussion. So this is really very a brief pointer to some practical steps to think about. So get to know the legislation. Now, I don't mean sitting down and reading it from front to cover, but look at some of the summaries we've got on our website and other areas. There's some really good sourcing of information you can have a look at online. Lead from the top. If you're a manager, a supervisor, a director, then really mean it when you say that this stuff matters for your organisation. Data is hugely valuable and so should be on your risk register. Know exactly what data that you have in your organisation, and some of these we're going to be revisiting in a second. Understand what basis you're using to process the data in the first place. There are a number of lawful conditions. One of you have to apply at least one to the processing. So that's a really important thing that people often miss. Keep records of your compliance program and your training and all of that good stuff so that you can show us if asked. Tell people when you collect information, this is something that we get queries about so often. And individuals and organisations often fail at the first hurdle. Be really clear upfront at the very beginning of the relationship with a client or customer, whatever, who you are, what you're doing with their data. That avoids so many issues further down the line. So be really transparent and clear about what you're doing. Staff awareness. It needs to be brought in by the whole team. Some of you will have very small teams, some of you will have larger teams. Everybody, this is not just sitting at the door of a compliance officer or anybody else. This is a joint initiative. The data flows throughout the organisation in all different ways. Individuals have rights and you have responsibilities. Understand what individuals' rights are, things like access to data, having rights to access data that you hold about individuals. So be prepared to engage with individuals who want to exercise their right. Data security and understanding breaches, we'll come on to that in a second, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it, to keep something which is of value, which is your data, keeping it secure and understanding what's happening to it. Think about who you're sharing your data with. That's really important. Are you authorized to share it? Are you authorized to do what you want to do with it? So data sharing is, especially when you've got quite complex data flows, is worth thinking about carefully. Registration we'll come on to, accountability we'll come on to, and know where to go to get help. We're working terribly hard to get as much information out and useful information out to our community as possible. So we'll give you a few pointers in a moment about where to go for help. As I said, there's a lot to take in here, especially in this slide. So this is really just giving you a sense of where you might want to start to be focusing, and you can find more details on every aspect of this slide on our website, and I would encourage you to when you have time to do so. For now, I want to just focus on the five steps that are highlighted here. It's not to say that the other steps don't matter, they really, really do, but just that if you can nail these five, then you're really going to be well on your way with everything else. I'm going to change the order around a little bit, primarily because accountability really is so fundamental. Without it, you can't really do much else. And it is what it says on the tin. It requires you to be able to be accountable for the steps you're taking to get this right, to be able to demonstrate that you are complying. And it covers both technical and organizational administrative processes that you will have in place, things like staff training, policies and procedures, sort of technical matters as well, so encryption. It covers a whole raft of things. So the thing to do is probably think about how you would respond to the question from the regulator or from anybody else. How are you complying? Show us how you are complying. And it's not really good enough to say, well, I just do. You can say, well, here we have the staff training program that is rolled out in this way or that way. So it's really about a practical response to the question of show us and demonstrate that you are accountable for your compliance program. Know your data. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Thinking back to the Debenhams sale for a second, for so many companies, data is a really, really valuable asset, if not the most valuable asset, non-consumable asset that you may have. And you need to start treating it as such. I don't think we have in the past. Across the globe, that's the case. Data hasn't really been recognized as having the value that it has. So we need to change that, the way we look at it. Once you understand it has value, you're much more likely to be interested in where it is, who has access to it, where it goes, all of that good stuff. So a data audit is really useful here. And again, we have some information about that to help you with the data audit on our website. Tell people what you're doing with their data. Again, so think about the points at which you collect data, whether that's through online or offline. Are you clear there who you are, why you're asking for the data, and what you're going to do with the data? When was the last time you checked your data protection or your privacy policy? If you have a web presence, did you even write it yourself? Very often you can buy off the shelf the privacy policies. They don't mean anything. It has to relate to your own activities. It has to be meaningful. If somebody complains that they weren't told about what was going to happen to their data, you want to be able to point back and say, no, it's in our data protection statement on our website or our privacy policy, call it whatever you like, as long as it's clear. You don't want to point them to what is someone else's template. It has to be meaningful and it has to be relevant to your own organization. So take a little moment, maybe one of the steps to go away from today and have a look at what you're actually saying, whether that's a hard copy form or an online form. The law does set out quite clearly, very clearly indeed, what information you must give to individuals when you're collecting their data. And again, you can find more information about that. Data security and handling breaches. We hear this talked about a lot. It's your responsibility to ensure that you have appropriate security and safeguards around your data. And don't forget, this is not just electronic. Often we talk about data security and we just imagine this in a darkened room, this hoodie cowered over a machine trying to hack into everything. Of course, that is a risk, but also hard copy data is a risk to you as well. So you need to make sure that that's kept safe. What is appropriate security? Again, there's no one size fits all. If it's high risk data, then it has to have a proper, really robust security sitting around it. If it's less risk, it's proportionate. You've got to be responsive to the risk that you pose. MI5 levels of security aren't required for all bits of information. So think how you'd expect your own data to be handled. If it's medical information, then you would expect a much higher level. If it's information that's in the public domain, maybe less so. And know your reporting duties. The law now requires organisations that suffer a personal data breach to report those to the regulator, to us, within 72 hours. And one thing, I don't know if anyone follows the publication of our breach information. We try and be as transparent as we can without naming organisations, but it's really helpful to look at trends that almost consistently we see human error playing a huge part. So I think that's something that maybe is not talked about as much as it should be. We are human beings, we will make mistakes, and that's okay. It's how you respond to them and how you work to mitigate them and prevent them, and train staff and support staff, not just point fingers at them. So there's a lot to learn from the breach reporting, not least the human. We all play a part in getting things wrong. And maintain your annual registration with us. This must be done between the 1st of January and the 20th of February each year. This is the first year of a new regime for us, and we're in the middle of it now. Registration is the first step for any organisation or entity handling personal data, and the income that it generates enables us to oversee an effective regulatory framework and regime. Importantly, independent of the states of Guernsey, and this independence is really essential for two reasons. Firstly, it ensures that the Bailiwick is well placed to take advantage of the digital era's economic benefits by safeguarding the free flow of data to and from the island, so we come up to the standards that other jurisdictions want to see in order to consider us safe to transfer data to and from. And secondly, the states of Guernsey is one of the biggest controllers, handlers of personal data. They'll have all of our data, and a lot of it, and a lot of pretty sensitive information as well. So we know that we act independently and impartially, but the perception is important. So being independent of that controller as the regulator is very important for us as well. Okay, this is the registration portal on our website. It's just as simple as we could have made it. It's not necessarily always straightforward for everybody. If they've not done it before, we get that. But we've tried to make it a simple process. There's a flat fee of £50 per year. If you have fewer than 50 staff, for over 50 staff, it's a £2,000 fee. Charities, not-for-profits do need to register, but there is no charge. And for the first time in the Bailiwick, we've got a facility whereby one controller can act as what's called a levy collection agency, an LCA, where they can pay the levy on behalf of other entities. And that was largely to make the process as easy as possible for certain sectors, finance sector, where one corporate service provider, for example, administers a number of entities. So rather than having to register hundreds of these things, that's an easier process. So that's something we try to be responsive to that particular industry to make the process as straightforward as possible. I totally understand that any additional admin or fee paying is not something that we really welcome. How to fund independent regulatory offices is not an easy question. The danger comes, though, when that question is not carefully considered and where there isn't transparency and accountability around those discussions and around those decisions. And we've worked really, really hard to consider this question carefully, working with government and with industry bodies to make it as straightforward as possible and effective as possible, so it does what it's meant to do without burdening industry too much. And we also understand the role that we must play as the regulator and the duty we have to ensure that we run a regulatory office that benefits all of us. We have a very, very broad remit, unlike other regulators. If you think about some other regulators that come to mind, they're sector specific, so they'll just that they will regulate a particular sector. But but there are few, if any, activities that don't somehow involve personal data. So we are really across the board regulator, and that brings with it unique challenges. And I think we have to be smarter about how we regulate. Our statutory duties include education and awareness. And we're doing a lot of good things, I think, such as running a schools program. And we've also made some really good updates and nice improvements to our website. So if you haven't looked at that already, I'd encourage you to do so. We also have regulatory enforcement duties, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it's often those that pique the most interest and get the most coverage, especially in the media. But they don't define us, and they're not the breadth of what we do by any stretch. And I'm absolutely clear that our objective is to build a community where compliance is built in, that it's accepted, that it's valued, and even celebrated, if I'm lucky. Because data harms are real. And if we think about other areas of our lives where there is some potential for harm in whatever form that might take, we just wouldn't tolerate a lack of governance and independent oversight. Think about driving, for example. If we all do that safely, then everybody benefits, don't they? And we get that pretty much. And whilst we may sometimes get frustrated with speed limits and so on the whole, we really do genuinely buy into the need for rules and regulations that sit around driving and road safety, and we don't really give them much of a second thought. We just get on with it. Registration has been the focus recently because it's pretty new. The new regime came in recently, but a bit like driving, you're not thinking about your driving license when you get into your car and start the engine, are you? It's an administrative process that is the first step in getting you behind the wheel. But it has very little to do with road safety or your attitude to road safety. So I'd encourage you to look at data protection registration in the same way. It allows us to build an infrastructure which will serve us all, the whole community. It's just the first step, though, and it's an important first step, but the steps that you take afterwards, how you handle that information, are to a significant degree what really matters. As I said, this was a whistle stop because I was asked around 20 to 25 minutes, so I've gone a little bit over, forgive me. The key is for you to think about your own situation, what you do with data in your organisation. There's a lot of information out there to help. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming. The first step is to, I think, understand why it matters so much, and then approach it as if it was your own information or the information of someone you love, one of your family members or friends. And that's a really good moral and ethical starting point for you. Because the minute we detach from the fact that we're talking about human beings, that there's a fundamentally human aspect to this, that's when it becomes really difficult, if not impossible, to engage with some of the practical steps that we need to take to get it right. Because we do need to take practical steps. It is something that we need to commit to and do professionally. It's not always easy, but we're working hard at our office, and I want to really stress that we are very, very focused on making it as easy as possible to genuinely support businesses, especially smaller businesses that maybe don't have the resources and the teams at their disposal around compliance and legal support, and to essentially get it right. So that is our aim. We may not always succeed, but we are trying very, very hard. So I have gone a little bit over, so forgive me, Kay. But if anybody has any questions, then I'm very happy to answer them now. Or as I said before, please feel free to contact me after the event if you want to talk in more privacy.